who's here. You know, Mildred and Zan, we had such a great talk with them last time, and they had such a it was so awesome because I had to run after that to go deal with something, and I didn't know that you guys had still had like this after party going on, which was really cool. And I'm glad I appreciated you hanging out with the fans afterward, and it sounds like you guys had a long conversation. And when this is done, anyone who wants to hang out with Mildred and Zan, you guys are welcome to go to the Hangout channel, the Fandom Hangout voice channel, to keep talking if you want to afterward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to answer the question as far as what our progress is, we there's a couple of things to note. First off, all the editing passes when it comes to the text is pretty much done.
We're still catching small things here and there as we pass it over to the PDF.
Yeah,
but that's always going to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Editing is a job that never seems to be done.
Yeah,
but as far as rewriting anything into original text and making sure the formatting is uniform and all of that, it's all properly established. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's mostly in the hands of our PDF team. Those being our friends Matt and Nami. They are doing a fantastic job with it. Mm-hmm. We are also gearing up for Sage, which is funny enough, it's the Sonic Amateur Games Expo, but they haven't done just Sonic games for a while. They highlight a lot of stuff in Sage, and we've got an online booth there. Mm-hmm. So we've been gearing up for that. Matt has been pulling over relevant information for people to look at, but there's also contact information to talk to Monk in case people want to do interviews instead, because in most games expos for video games, you can very easily show off the game for 30 minutes, 40 minutes just by turning on the game and playing it. Mm-hmm. Tabletop RPG, not so easy to do that unless you do free generation. And one of the keystones of our project is customization, both at character creation and all throughout the game. So doing pre-gens kind of defeats half the purpose of our game.
Mm-hmm. And before we get too far down that line, actually, we should probably give everyone some context since we last spoke. So I want to first give context on, because we talked about the immense work that you guys put into this. So first, why don't you reintroduce the Final Fantasy project and how long it's taken you to get to this point, and what it'll take for, when is it, how people can get involved, at what point can people get involved and learn more about it, that kind of stuff. So we can have some context before we go into it.
Yeah. Well, this is a project which we've called Final Fantasy TRPG Legend Edition. It is something we've been working on for over 3 years to basically do our own spin on the concept of Final Fantasy in TTRPG form, drawing upon some of the previous iterations that were descended from the Returners project in the mid-90s, as well as adding our own spin to certain things with a certain set of pillars built around. Those being mythos over setting. We want this to be just as viable for any subgenre of FF that one could think of, or even stuff that we couldn't or we haven't at this time.
In short, we want you to be able to create any Final Fantasy that you want to, even if that Final Fantasy has never been in game form before.
Yeah.
If it's something you thought up of, and it's a setting and a genre that a Final Fantasy has never touched upon, we still want you to be able to keep that setting, that genre that you've thought up, and use the soul of Final Fantasy to build your story in it.
Yeah.
That is very cool, by the way, that you were able to. Was that? Well, I'll save my question. I have a question related to that. I'll let you guys finish.
The other pillars, and we make a big deal about pillars because this is a trap a lot of designers fall into, where they haven't designed around a particular goal. They're just throwing stuff out there to see what sticks. And the second pillar is customization is king. The character design is very customizable. Monster design is very customizable. And even the way advancement can work in certain forms is heavy on the customizability.
We have a lot of alternate rule sets for a lot of things, especially for advancement.
Yeah.
We wanted anything and everything to be able to mesh together in a way that people could create, as I put it when I wrote it up, to be able to create their fantasy without compromise. We don't want people to be beholden to the idea that they must optimize. Of course, there will always be power gamers that optimize, and that's fine. It's cool. That's your way to play. And there will always be people who want to design gimped characters for interesting reasons. You can gimp a character without making them completely useless, by the way, people. We want people to be able to create a character that is uniquely theirs, that they don't have to compromise on. They don't have to go, well, I have to take this or that or the other to get this one thing that's really important to my character, or to go, I have to take this, that, or the other because the party composition is bad, or whatever that may be. And so with that customization, we want people to make what they can without compromise.
Yeah. And I'd say the third pillar ties into the adventuring loop that we've designed. The preparation, exploration, encounter, and downtime, which is somewhat inspired by the 4-act structure you see in a lot of East Asian media, although I'm more familiar with the Japanese term for it, Kisho Tenketsu. Introduction, development, twist, conclusion. If you dig around enough with anime, with video games out of Japan, with storytelling in various forms, you will find this format in one form or another.
Yep. They also have their own unique form of the 3-act structure called Johaku, which technically is what the Rebuild movies were doing until Anno decided to go, let's make it Kisho Tenketsu anyway, with the 4th movie Thrice Upon a Time.
But
Anno is one of those.
And this structure isn't limited to Japan, but I'm more familiar with the Japanese wording of it.
Yeah. It is very heavily inspired by East Asian fiction and Southeast Asian fiction. It's heavily used right there. And the names are not indicative of a very specific thing. Like preparation can be anything from going to buy items to finding out the information you need to go onto your exploration section, to there's a bunch of things that preparation can be, and be their own social interactions or anything of that nature. The same with encounter. Encounter is not just once. It's supposed to describe the climax of that particular arc, that particular adventure you're going through. You'll have some obviously smaller combat encounters and social encounters and everything else while you're going along, but the encounter is meant to be the big climax for that particular adventuring arc.
So how did the third pillar, because the first two were mythos, the customization is king, and the third was the preparation and exploration. What was the third again? How did that one go?
The third is the adventuring loop, and it's made of 4 phases: preparation, exploration, encounter, downtime.
Okay. You said there's a 4th pillar too?
No.
Oh, okay.
There's 4 parts to the third pillar.
Got it. Okay. So when you guys are... Oh, sorry, you're going to say something.
Well, I was going to expand a little bit upon that third pillar. The reason we give that 4-act structure is as a form of impetus. We want people to be able to keep the momentum in their game without things getting too stale or bogging down. This gives them a little bit of structure they can work within, play around with, and even work outside of if they don't think they need it. Again, we want people to use the system as freely as possible. So the 4-act structure is definitely there to give guidance and structure to those who need it, but can be eschewed for those who may not.
Yeah.
So with when you were going back to the beginning, when we were talking, when you were a little while ago, you were talking about wanting to create this experience that allowed everyone to have, you could play basically any Final Fantasy, iteration you wanted, or make up your own. What are some of the considerations you have to make when making such a broad, basis for this RPG for something as wide ranging as Final Fantasy? Like, did you have to like, okay, these are the common threads that make up Final Fantasy, and then we're gonna create that as the foundation, and every one of them share these same elements, or how did you go
I'll,
about doing that?
I'll quote our section from chapter 1, actually. In Mythos Oversetting, specifically, we say that we are taking all of the hallmarks of the mythos of Final Fantasy, because Final Fantasy itself is not a shared universe. But there are plenty of themes, names, and concepts that always return in a Final Fantasy in some form or another. Some of these common examples that we have listed are the idea of crystals in any form in Final Fantasy, types of magic and names of associated spells, ships, both naval and airborne, the playstyles of several job and class archetypes, recurring creatures and summoned beings, a character named Sid, and in my opinion, also the mascot characters such as the Chocobo, the Moogle, etc. So we took the elements that make Final Fantasy identifiable by feel rather than by the fact that it has Final Fantasy on it, and you're using these Final Fantasy characters in a game. There are specific hallmarks that that when people see them, use them, even if they don't know the games of Final Fantasy, they'll be like, "This is Final Fantasy," and that's what we had to gather the soul of the franchise.
I love that. What was so funny was that when you were going down your list and you mentioned Sid as one of those elements, and it's kind of taken for granted now that that's the case, that it kind of even took me by surprise when you mentioned that. I was like, oh, right, that's right. So do you require it as part of the game setup, or how do you?
That's not up to us.
That yeah. The game itself is a toolbox. We made what is essentially a sandbox style tabletop. There is no required setting. Any lore entries we have, for example, for our jobs or for our races, can be completely eschewed. I mean, there's a GM's note at the beginning of the races document that says any of the lore entries for these races are absolutely subject to change for your world setting or ideas. These lore entries are for fun and to expand upon something seen in the Final Fantasy franchise or in specific games, and are not intended to be prescriptive. For example, your Mithra do not need to be endlessly curious, and your dwarves can absolutely be the classic taciturn drinkers under the mountain if you so desire.
Once
it's at
somebody's table, it's out of our hands and we don't care.
Yeah.
We have a very "I'm not your dad" policy when it comes to that. The analogy I've often used is we are not trying to give people a Lego playset. We're trying to give people the blue bucket of Legos that everyone had as a kid.
I see. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm the one who actually wrote that GM note. I rewrote basically the entire races chapter myself for all of the descriptions. So there are some fun things I thought up for the way I foresee the races being and the way I would run the game. And that's why I also had to put in that GM note, because I'm like, well, this is my vision for the races, but what if it's somebody else's vision?
So can you remind us again how long it took you guys to get to this point?
3 years.
About three to 3.5 years, actually.
Yeah. 3.5 years. So what was the most difficult part of putting this together that you had?
Research.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Okay, so Final Fantasy as a franchise is enormous. It is fantastically huge. It is probably bigger than any other video game RPG franchise out there. I'd say it's bigger than old big ones like Ultima. I'd say it's bigger than some of its contemporaries like Tales of. I'd say it's bigger than even the other big one it competed with for so long, Dragon Quest.
And
Final
we're not
Fantasy
talking big in terms of popularity or anything like that, but just the sheer amount of subject material.
Yes. Final Fantasy has gone through it. What the root and soul of Final Fantasy as a video game series is, what it all boils down to is iteration and experimentation. They change things with every game. They experiment, see what works, keep some of it for the next game, maybe chop off some stuff that didn't work for another game. But it also does a ton of spin-offs. I mean, you have Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon. That's a Final Fantasy game. It's a Final Fantasy spin-off, but it's a Final Fantasy game.
Mm-hmm.
You have obviously the tactics games. You have the rhythm games, Theatrhythm Final Fantasy and all of its iterations. You have the mobile games, which, while we ourselves are not mobile gamers, the mobile games are probably some of the more robust mobile games seen out there. Record Keeper, Dimensions, especially Brave Exvius. They're all
War of the Visions.
War of the Visions, exactly. They're all there's a plethora, an absolute cornucopia of information out there in these games. And then, of course, on top of that, you have the games, you have the mainline games themselves, which are dense RPGs, one and all. You have any side games from the main games. I consider some of the sequels to like Final Fantasy X or Final Fantasy 3. Final Fantasy 13-2 felt way more like a side game than a main game. Like 13 to Lightning Returns felt like those connected. 13-2 kind of felt like it was off to the side.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me personally. Or the DLC chapters in 15. There's a lot of information even in those. And then on top of all of that, you have the most lore-dense part of Final Fantasy that is almost impossible for someone in the US to get a hand on physically, and those are the Ultimania guides.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimania is made by a third-party developer or third-party distributor and studio, basically. It started out, if you look at the information about Ultimania, it started out as a book of perfect works, is what they were called, and they were made by a subsidiary of Square Enix called Digicube. But then Digicube went out, and Studio Bent Stuff, which was a studio that wrote game guides for Final Fantasy VII, became the Ultimania writers and are now also technically a subsidiary of Square. But Ultimania guides are unique in that these are not guides written by a third-party studio that has no information. They have direct lines to developers, writers, character designers for each game. What is written in the Ultimanias is word of God. It is the developers. It is the writers just giving this information to a writing studio who then make the books and distribute them. And Ultimania has a ton of hidden stuff you never see in the games, or it's only hinted at in a game. Stuff that blows some people's minds and, of course, makes salty shippers on Twitter ever the saltier because they hate that their ship is confirmed as a headcanon, not the actual canon.
Remember, folks, headcanons get the headcanon. But I do want to note a couple things when it comes to why we went this far with our particular research. From the word go, I wanted something that was just as viable for the more futuristic or more contemporary angles of FF as much as the classical or steampunk ends. Now, putting aside the fact that a lot of people have this idea that Final Fantasy has medieval fantasy roots, it doesn't. Anyone who says that is blowing all the smoke. A lot of the previous games that were within that lineage of the Returners project very much skewed towards the SNES era. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the SNES era to death. You know, that's where we get 4, 5, and 6. Those are all-time classics. However, because of the fact that they skewed towards that, if somebody wants to do something that's a little bit more like, say, 7, they're going to have to do an extra bit of work. And that extra bit of work borders on them being backseat designers as it is. Now, homebrewing is inevitable, but I don't like the idea of having somebody walk through hot coals just to get where they need to when it comes to that kind of extra work. So that was one of our goals. The other thing is, I've mentioned this elsewhere, and I may have mentioned this the last time I was on. One of my favorite Star Trek stories involves Harv Bennett, who stepped on as the producer for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, also known as the best Star Trek movie. When he stepped on, and he mostly did that because they had a reputation for maintaining a budget, and the first film went over budget.
By a lot.
Yeah. He had not seen a single episode of Star Trek. So in preparation, he watched the entire original series and took notes. And I felt if we're gonna be doing this sandbox level thing of FF, that means that I have to take notes, even with games that I had already played, because we didn't just go back and look at the original games or the side games or anything like that. We went into things like interviews, stuff that was on the cutting room floor, concept art, all of it.
So, I mean, that's such an undertaking. I mean, when you guys organized this, when you put this from the very beginning, with the amount of lore that you had to access and everything that you had to put together, how did you organize a project like this? I mean, for us, when we do Flux Fantasy, for example, we use, we have a number of tools that we use internally to manage all that. One of them being like OneNote that we treat as kind of like our internal. We have this internal wiki that what we call our internal wiki, which is OneNote, and all Flux Destiny lore is captured, like all of it, including all spoilers. Everything is in there, and we also do the development of the RPG was done within OneNote, so that us and other people that were working with us, our artists and writers and things that were working with us could collaborate in one space. How big was the team outside of you guys, and how did you guys organize this? Because I mean, the amount of lore and what you guys are doing is a monumental undertaking.
So the design team is us, just us
Mhm.
two. We did the game design, him and I, meeting every week, collaborating inside a set of Google Docs every week.
Before that, I was collating a bunch of stuff in a program called Scrivener.
Yeah. And the big thing is, this didn't start as, hey, we're going to develop our own game. This started as, we did a thought experiment on an episode of Geek Watch about turning Final Fantasy jobs into like classes for I think it was 4th edition, wasn't it, Monk?
It was Legend System.
It was Legend System. And then we just said, Legend System actually really good for this. Maybe there could be a game from this. And it just kind of snowballed as we spitballed about it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just said, okay, I guess we're making a game now.
Yeah.
And
in all fairness, when it comes to that approach, we are in good company. There's plenty of RPGs out there that started out as just a collection of house rules for an existing game and then evolved themselves into being their own games.
Yeah. And it eventually, we didn't get too many people outside involved, because at the beginning, it was just us creating the rules and putting things together. We weren't even taking lore entries. We just had stuff pulled from the Final Fantasy wiki as stopgaps so that the documents didn't look as bare. We had to consider things like, how many of these spells are we going to keep? How many of them are we going to kick out? Which ones just don't fit our system as it works? Mm-hmm. We did the same thing with summons. We did the same thing with jobs. We even brought in some jobs that technically haven't been in any Final Fantasy, but they're cool ideas that would feel like part of Final Fantasy and would fit a class fantasy or a job fantasy or a character fantasy somebody might want to play.
Yeah.
So we brought them in. We also brought in stuff from associated but not directly Final Fantasy stuff, like the Bravely series.
Mm-hmm.
And because of all of this, there was a lot of shuffling around with later information. We first needed to decide our core mechanics, which is what we started with. How are we going to resolve skill checks and conflict?
Zan can vouch for the fact that I have yelled at people in the past for not establishing their core before they start writing mechanics. This is a repeat frustration I've had with some designers.
Why do you think that's the case, that they approach it that way first?
Because they are focusing on their favorite parts of their favorite games, which isn't a bad thing. but they're only focusing on the favorite parts of their favorite games.
Hmm.
Or they're only focusing on their favorite part of their favorite medium that they want to turn into a game.
Mm-hmm.
Not to pick on you, Dragon, if you're in Monk's streams right now, since he did stream them to his stuff as well. But we've had to get on a guy's case, Dragon, multiple times because he says he wants to make a tokusatsu RPG, and we've had to try and get him to narrow that spectrum because tokusatsu is a very wide spectrum, and even when we've gotten him to narrow it to a hero game, a la Garo, Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, it's still very, very broad. And then he focuses on details that aren't going to be as important at first, such as what type of atmosphere the tokusatsu world is going to have, rather than focusing on how does he want conflict, and thus, whether that's combat, whether that's social, whatever form of conflict you're going into, because that's what skill checks generally decide. There's some sort of obstacle or conflict in your way, and you need to resolve it. Conflict resolution within a game is one of the first things you need to decide how that's going to look mechanically. Not what dice you're going to be rolling, if you even roll dice, but how mechanically does that all mesh together with your core ideas and make the game engaging.
Like when we established the pillars, that was before we did anything mechanically. If I had to use a video game example of this mode of thinking and why this is important, there's a unfortunately misinterpreted quote from Jamie Grismeyer, who back in the day was a developer at Bungie working on the Halo games. He talked about how if you can develop 30 seconds of fun, you can stretch that out into a whole game. Now, a lot of people ended up taking that literally when the point was you establish that core and then you can repeat that core with context. And if you need to see that in action, just look at the first few minutes of Combat Evolved. It's still doing the same kind of 30 seconds with how firefights work, but the context is constantly changing.
Oops, sorry, my mute. I lost my mute button for a second. So with that, was there anything that, with the vast amount that you guys had to pull together and to research and creating this this foundation, was there anything that you had to leave on the cutting room floor that you just had no choice but had to, given
Absolutely
the Puppet Master?
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to use,
were any of those very painful cutting room floor things that you had to do?
I can't think of any of the decisions, at least as far as we made, as being painful. I know that there were some ideas that both of us, and I can't think of specifics right now because the final product as it is just excites me so much. But I know that he and I came into discussions, what some people might call arguments, just because we disagreed. But no, disagreement does not equal an argument. But discussions of, hey, this feature would be really cool, and then we had to have the hard conversation of, does it add to the system in a way that is impactful and useful, or are we just adding this for its own sake?
Yeah.
And I know that there were times I had to be like, Monk, we can't do that, it doesn't fit, and Monk had to do the same with me. With the Puppet Master, that's usually our go-to example of something that had to be left behind, because the Puppet Master is a companion-based class. And as we looked more into it's only ever appeared in Final Fantasy XI as a full job. And as we looked into how the Puppet Master works, we realized we already had other companion classes that filled the same niche, or filled a similar enough niche that the Puppet Master didn't have its own identity. So we were like,
there's also
gotta leave it behind.
There's also been cases where there's things we've been tempted to bring in, but they didn't fit, but they were too skewed towards a particular subgenre of fantasy, and that would run in conflict with the whole mythos not setting attitude that we had. We had a bit. This wasn't something that we put in, but we had a bit of an argument with a certain contrarian in a different forum who was asking why we didn't put a ranger like class or job within our class and job list. Uh, and the big reason for that is for starters, the concept of the ranger in the typical sense is very much skewed towards high fantasy.
It's also it also in the traditional sense tends to skew towards a very specific style of play.
Mm-hmm.
And while our jobs are meant to be hyper focused, they're not meant to be hyper constrictive.
Yeah, a lot of jobs in a lot of classes in class-based games will usually have you picking that one class, and thus that one class can afford to be multi-purpose. Because of the fact that you're picking 3 jobs that you're developing at 3 different rates within our system, each of those individual jobs has to be hyper-focused, and the multi-purposeness of the character comes from the combination of those 3.
Not not to mention the fact that there are still feats that you can get and choose to customize your character. The way that you build your weapons is going, and your armor is going to change how your character works. If you're a spellcaster, the spells you choose to have equipped are going to be are going to change how your character is effective.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that all, we wanted to build a system that if 2 people chose the same class and the same 3 jobs, they could still come out with 2 entirely different characters mechanically,
Mm-hmm.
and they can.
Yeah, and
Success to me.
It's for that reason that a lot of the things that are considered typical of the ranger, and this was something I had made clear at that time, were things that were already being accounted for in other jobs. Like the whole accurate marksman thing, there's the sniper. The whole animal companion thing, there's the beastmaster. The whole living off the land kind of thing, there's a whole subsystem involving extracting materials that we've developed that accomplishes that. Plus, not wanting to limit people to this one particular type of fantasy. I've been very vocal about my frustrations with some games that claim that they can do any kind of fantasy, but the mechanics, the writing, the lore, so on and so forth, very much skews one way. Obviously, your D&D likes are a prime whipping boy for this kind of thing, because people keep telling me you can run any kind of fantasy with them, and it's very clear in the design that it skews towards Western Europe. Nothing wrong with that, but as the saying goes, don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining.
Right.
But the biggest thing with the way that stuff is put in is it always came back to our core ideals. Does it fit those 3 core pillars?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there it moved to the core engine and said, does this mesh well with the way we've decided the core mechanics are?
Mm-hmm.
And if it fulfilled those 2, it was almost there as something to add. The last thing we had to consider is, does this fulfill some sort of fantasy niche people want to use in Final Fantasy?
Yeah.
And that was actually the biggest criteria that stopped us from putting in anything that we had like a last minute, oh, hey, it would be cool to add this. And it fits the other 2, but it doesn't, that niche is already filled by other stuff. Oh, okay. Never mind. We don't need it.
If you could go back in time, like let's say I showed up and I said, Mildra, Zan, follow me. I'm going to take you to my time machine. And you got 30 seconds when we get to the start of your I'm going to take you back to the start of this project. And you can tell each one of yourselves one piece of information from what you've learned during this whole process that would make your life so much easier over the course of this 3.5 years. What would each one of you say to yourselves?
You first, Smoke.
Be a little more selective on who I do interviews with. Nothing against either of you. It's a whole other matter. Zan knows the story.
I think if I'm going to tell us
Hey,
anything at the very
paradox, because then I guess I wouldn't show up on your interview after that. I think you would have told
No,
yourself.
you would be fine. It's someone that Zan and I have had a run in with that ended up blowing up in our faces because somebody couldn't brief people properly.
Yeah, we won't get into that. That's an entire other story.
But as it relates to the RPG itself, though, the development of the RPG,
Honestly, I can't really
like
think of any.
is there something that later you're like, crap, you know what? We should have done this. We should have thought of this at the start, because then you had to, like, many threads connect to one thing, and then you're like, we have to unravel all of it. And
I can think of one thing right now. Thank you, Chris. And that is, make sure spell casting was standardized at the beginning, Monk.
It was. It just ran into a bit of a problem later on.
You standardized it backwards.
Yeah.
How difficult was that to make the change?
A monk had to go in and change the dice numbers for every spell that had dice that had dice rolls, so that each rank of spell used the same number and facings of dice that they were supposed to. For a small breakdown, spells when you get them can have a rank of 1 through 9. The rank increases the target number of the casting roll in order to cast the spell, and increases its effect. Rank the way we had designed it when we talked about rank 1 through 9 was 1d8, 1d10, 1d12, 2d8, 2d10, 2d12, 3d8, 3d10, 3d12. But higher tiers of spells, such as fire to Fyra to Fyraga to Fyraja in Final Fantasy, started their ranks started higher than 1. And what he did, instead of leaving those dice lists the same, so that if it starts at rank 3, it just doesn't have 1d8 through 1d12, or 1d8 and 1d10, it just starts at 1d12. He started rank 3 at 1d8.
Mm-hmm.
He started it back.
Yeah.
So he had to go back through spells and change them all. Actually, this was quite recently. This is like last month or the month before.
Yeah, but it wasn't like it was a painful process. It was, all I had to do was just a few copy pastas here and there, and I had that done in about an hour.
Yeah. The hard part was me convincing the monk it was necessary.
Yeah.
I eventually got through.
But like I said last time, Zan and I are the type of people who we will throw hands and then go out for drinks afterwards in terms of disagreements.
Not to mention, I made a very reasoned argument about how casting a rank 9 spell that is only rank 9 and only getting a 1d8 of damage out of it does not feel good for a player.
Yeah.
Well, but that's what makes those kind of relationships in developing this kind of complex, project really not only fulfilling, but why they end up being so good is because you're intellectually honest with each other, and you can, you respect each other in such a way that you can share those things, that it's not personal. You guys are going for the best, experience possible. And so, a lot of people, I've seen a lot of projects ruined because they, the folks involved, it becomes more of an ego fight than it really is about the product itself. And obviously, ego is going to creep in every now and then. That's just human nature. But I mean, in general, being able to just know that your core, your North Star of this is that we want to create something really awesome that has an awesome experience, and all decisions really hang on that.
We have all roads lead to Rome policy on that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see that. And so right now, how much more do you have in this phase before you're going to roll it out?
So, since the text is finished and all the rewriting is finished and all the editing is essentially finished, it's mostly in the PDF team's hands right now.
Mm-hmm.
They are They are a super team. I love Matt and Nami both. Fantastic friends. They helped me badmouth Monk when he wasn't there while I was doing all the fucking formatting edits. Pardon my French there.
Oh no! Let me tell you, Ella will tell you when we get to the like I start getting PTSD thinking of formatting edits because like it's so tedious. And it's like
Chris. No, the first thing I had to do was go through the book and decide what our formatting was going to be because it was. And then I had to write a glossary and a formatting guide, and then I had Nami and Matt helping me doing all the formatting changes. And every time Monk put a period instead of a colon after the words in the following list, I can remember each and every one. Monk.
Yeah.
It's okay. I love you, Monk. It's so good.
Yeah, I know. Oh, you wouldn't be the bane of you wouldn't be the bane of my fucking existence otherwise.
let me tell you, we decided, so we do pretty much everything through Microsoft, like all our stuff, Excel and Word and everything. But the core text itself, for whatever reason, we started doing it in Google Docs. And I don't normally work with Google Docs, but we were doing it and, we just went with the flow, right? But you've seen the core rule book. It's long. And so in the process, when I was getting to the editing part and I started realizing that do I want to capitalize that? Because we established this. One thing I didn't do first, which I regret not doing it at the very start when we jumped in, was setting up the style guide for the terminology.
Yeah.
Because as we were developing things, we sometimes would capitalize things and sometimes not, and then I had to go back and forth and decide. And then ultimately, I put the style guide together, and then I had to go change it. Well, Google Docs has such a crappy find, advanced, replace mechanism. It's so literal and not as flexible as Microsoft Word that it was I want to. I'm like that scene in Poltergeist from 1982 when he's in the dude the researcher is like
he's looking in the mirror.
Yeah, that was me, like going through like everything and having to like because it wanted to know if everything was so literal, even if it was a part of a word, you couldn't separate it out and say no, just this word, just these letters. So anyways, you triggered me with that because it's such a horrible experience that we need to start a support group, Zan.
Well, to quote Alucard in a different context, you will, excuse me, I killed a lot of errors to earn the title of editor-in-chief. You will address me as such. Okay, there we go. I'm going to change my answer from the 30 seconds to tell myself thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at myself and go, write a formatting guide right now.
Yes.
Right now.
Yeah.
A glossary, a formatting guide, everything right now.
Well, it's so funny. It's such an important thing for many reasons. Not only because we talked about this in our previous conversation, the importance of even the formatting in terms of like capitalization, etc. These are things that are important because they are the little details that all build up to show how serious you take your project, right?
Yes.
And how serious you take your world. And if you're sloppy with that kind of stuff, it reflects in the world. So in the final product ultimately. And so for me, I that pain is worth it because at the end of the day I go, no, I keep telling, this is at least the lie I tell myself, is that no, this is going to be an experience that people will look at and really enjoy for the depth of thought we put into every little detail. And in some cases in our situation it's a little different because we can affect the Flux Destiny canon. I know that can't yours is one way because you obviously can't affect Final Fantasy canon, but for us, I would say, okay, well, do I want to change the style guide for Flux Destiny to reflect Flux Fantasy? And so it just became this battle between. So I think I would join you, Zan, in that in the time capsule back and share the same thing to myself.
Yeah.
Of
course. Of course.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of course, I may end up commandeering that particular time capsule to yet to yell at a certain judge in California just so I can say fuck Harmony Gold.
That's an entirely different story, though.
Yeah,
Hey, you
but
know
I am
what?
extremely petty. You know this.
We both are, Monk.
I think we would all turn a blind eye and let you do whatever you had to do, Mildred, because we know it would be for the greater good. Okay,
The greater good.
Shut it!
greater. So with so how are people while it's in the stage of development and you guys are in these kind of final stages, do you have a place that you're sending people to sign up for updates? Like, is there,
Yes,
We have an itch.io page for
I've
it.
got it already,
you're in
Monk.
the chat here and we can
Yeah, I got it. Don't worry.
I recently put up an update a couple days ago
Actually, just
discussing
yesterday, I think.
the differences between what we're doing and what the FF14 TTRPG that's going to be released probably next year is doing, because that was at the suggestion of Matt, since he figured that's something that was going to get brought up, since completely unprompted somebody brought up our game in the subreddit for that project.
For the FF14 TRPG that's officially made by Square.
Yeah, and
Or
I
at least
didn't.
published
I
by
wouldn't have
Square.
known about it if Matt didn't bring it up. So I did a post called "Addressing the Elephant in the Room," and I've talked about some of the method to the madness and some of our design principles.
I will note that his post does need an editing run.
It was a stream of consciousness thing.
How many times he didn't capitalize one of the F's in FF for TTRPG?
Oh,
Yeah.
Chris knows. Chris knows.
I can't. It's funny because I'll be when Ella, like, and not just Ella, but anyone, like, I can spot a double, like a triple space from a mile away. Like if there's a double or triple space or like a missing comma or anything, I've become so extreme with that kind of stuff that I can see it a mile away. So I just that's my Achilles heel, I think.
It never ends. Once you start editor brain rot, it never stops.
It never stops. It never stops.
Yeah.
So what's looking in terms of timeline? When is it going to be public? Are you going to go to like beta first, or are you going to go internal playtesting? How are you guys handling that part?
So we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
Mm-hmm.
We are shooting for a PDF release sometime this year. That is what we are shooting for.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no internal playtesting done. We're just going to let everybody do their own thing with it. And if they come to us and say, "Hey, this is totally broken," and we look at it and it's still within the mechanics of the game and completely covered by the mechanics of the game, we'll be like, "Yeah, okay, it's totally broken." Like when we were adding jobs and deciding which jobs were to stay and go, we determined that, hey, some of these combinations are really busted, and we're like, we're just going to leave that way because we want people to be busted. We want people to have that power fantasy.
Brawl minus mod more than once when it comes to our philosophy.
Yeah, the Brawl minus is a mod for Super Smash Brothers Brawl. Brawl Plus was a mod used to try and make every character tournament viable for like actual like Evo basically level. Brawl Minus, the philosophy was if every character's broken, then no one is. And yes, that was one of the taglines on the mod for a while because syndrome references are always cool. My favorite tagline is still "the borker the better."
Mm-hmm.
But every character is so broken, they're just fun to play.
Yeah.
And that's what this is. Everything, if there's a broken piece of the game that somebody's like, I combined these 3 jobs, and now this character can melt like 2 boss level NPCs like it's nothing. I'm like, and there's a problem with this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you never seen how powerful you get near the end of a Final Fantasy game? Excuse me?
Yeah. I think one of the more infamous cases that where we realized this kind of thing was when we were developing the Arcanist job. And Arcanist is a mage associated job that is all about forcing the enemy to hit you so that you can transfer a curse over to them. That
Not
is
forcing. It's just that they transfer curses upon hit.
yeah.
It's that when you combine it with our Fencer Warrior class that has the taunt ability that imposes penalties on an enemy that doesn't target them, that the Fencer and Arcanist get a little tasty.
Yeah. And when we realized it, we had a laugh, and then we kept it in.
I'm not going to stop things from being broken. Part of the fantasy is you are a bunch of people who have gone from being everyday people to powerhouses that are fighting God in most Final Fantasy games.
Well, I feel a little greedy because I took the whole time to ask you guys questions, and I was going to turn to the audience and ask questions.
Mhm.
But always, whenever we get in a talk, I started writing down all these questions as we're talking because it's always so awesome talking with you guys. And as we come to the end of this now, I want to give you guys all a chance. Everyone who wants to join and talk more with Monk and Zan. As we wrap up, they'll be heading over to the fandom hangout voice channel, and you guys can ask them anything you want. You can chat with them. They are they're more fun hosts than I am. So you guys will have a lot more fun with them on that. Is there any what I would love to close the main event with each one of you giving your biggest wisdom for people who aspire to make their own RPGs. If you were going to say, come down from the mountain with your stone tablets of RPG rules,
I
what
feel
would
called
be
out.
I knew you were being called out, Monk. Chris, there is one other thing we forgot to do.
Yeah, what's that?
We forgot to sing him happy birthday.
Oh,
All right,
dude,
where's the hat?
I totally forgot. I promised I was going to do that. All right, I'm going to sing you happy birthday, Mildra, on the record. I'm going to sing. Zan, you're going to join me too, right?
Yep.
All right, ready? We're going the traditional one, right?
Yeah.
All right, and then we're going to say, are we going to go with Monk in the two Monk in this? Is that I want to get all the details right so that we're completely.
I'm going to say happy birthday, you asshole, but that's just because it's me.
You asshole. Hey, okay, but remember, this is where the style guide comes in. Let's do the style guide. If it's asshole, let's go for it.
Okay.
All right, ready?
Yep.
Happy
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, you asshole. Happy birthday to you. Hooray! As for our wisdom monk, what do we have for them?
I think the best thing that we can invoke is the 3 questions, which no matter what your level of experience, anybody designing a game should be asking themselves these 3 questions and
at the
should
beginning
have an
of
answer.
any developmental project.
And this is before you even start putting pen to paper, before you even start writing mechanics.
Sorensen's 3 questions are: what is your game about? How does your game go about achieving that? What behaviors does your game encourage or discourage?
And if there's any addendum that I would put onto that kind of thing, it is, and sometimes I've had to say this with such force that it's like I'm grabbing someone by the collar and shaking them. Stop overthinking about what sort of dice you're going to use as your core mechanic. You are missing the forest for the fucking trees.
My wisdom is, don't be afraid to have mechanics that don't work later on. Don't be afraid of things all of a sudden falling out as the development goes further. In short, don't be afraid to be wrong or to fail, because mistakes are where we learn our best lessons, and you can always improve from rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, as the saying goes, you can't fall off the floor, right? So, so that is great wisdom to impart on everyone. Well, this was really awesome, guys. Thank you again for coming back for this second follow-up conversation. I'm so glad this time we've double recorded it to make sure that we had it. Ella has been quiet because she's been recording on her end, and we've got you guys are recording. So thank God we've got it finally this time. And just wanted to thank you guys again for coming and joining. Everyone here in the community loves you guys, and we just love having you part of it. And I want to add that Zan, you should consider, if you haven't already, moonlighting as a voice actor. I think you would do very well in anime.
Hey, you could break mics and get paid for it.
Yeah.
I mean,
let me make a few calls. And I'll get you set up.
Okay, hey, if you can do it, man.
For reference, when it comes to the whole breaking mics, his spirit animal is Morikawa, who is notorious for having broken 2 microphones in his debut work for Tekkaman Blade.
Yeah, he broke it when screaming Volteca twice.
Then
they asked him to bring his own mic because his mic doesn't break.
Well, I am going to say thank you guys so much. Everyone in the audience, thank you guys for sticking around for this awesome call. If you guys want to join, my buddies here, they're going to be over in the fandom hangout. And, I wish I could join. I have to actually go take my kids.
You got kids.
So I'm going to go take care of that. So I'll let you guys go do that. But thank you guys again, Monk, Zan. Thank you so much. And Ella, who's in the background, who's taking care of all the tech stuff behind the scenes, who my right-hand woman who I could do nothing without. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
You definitely will.
Right.
And I hope you look forward to the 30th.
Absolutely. Take care, guys.
Stay frosty.
Peace out.
All right.
I think that's our cue to go to the fandom hangout then, Monk. Okay?
Yep. So I'm going to wrap things up on the recording end on my part.
I'll be down there then.